one of the biggest challenges is a kind of bunker mentality where people aren't informed. So parents don't know what we're thinking potentially. Members of staff don't know what we're thinking and how we're planning ahead. People with whom we're working outside the school, they need to be equally well informed. So we need to make sure that we are communicating with everybody all of the time.
Welcome to the Independent School Podcast. Thinking and acting strategically is the key to both securing the future of your school and helping to build a more equal and just world. My name's Juliette Corbett. I'm a consultant, speaker and facilitator specialising in helping independent schools. In this podcast, I translate tried and tested strategy and fundraising techniques into a language that works for schools. So if you're a senior leader in a private school and you want your daily work to feel less exhausting and more strategic, and if you want once more to feel the joy of making the world a better place through education, then you're in the right place. Welcome, and let's get started on this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm really excited this week to be joined by Alastair Chirnside, Warden of St Edward's, Oxford. Alastair and I have a conversation to share with you where we start off focusing on partnerships and service and the importance of embedding really authentic approach to partnerships with community groups, with local state schools, into the culture of an independent school. And Alastair talks about the things that they're doing at St Edward's which have enabled them to make real strides in this area in recent years. The conversation then expands beyond partnerships to think about the role of school leaders in curating the intellectual life of the school, the intellectual community that you are leading, and thinking a little bit about how to make that really authentic and useful for the pupils as well as for the staff. I couldn't help but also talk to Alastair about the importance of coherence of strategic decision making. As you know, strategy is one of my passions. And it's really interesting to hear about his take on how all of the decisions that they're making around partnerships, around the intellectual life of the school, as well as far beyond those topics, making positive decisions that are going to be reinforcing each other and choices they're making that reinforce that whole strategy. I also talked to him about the importance of finding time for leaders to think about the changes in their external environment, for teachers to keep up to date with their subjects, and then finally the critical importance of communication and the use of language as well in communicating evolution and change, especially when it's in response to shifting external environments in which our schools operate. So Alastair was brought up near Oxford and attended the Dragon, winning a King's Scholarship to Eton. He took a congratulatory first in classics and French, and then started his career as a fund manager with Schroders in London before going into teaching in 2004. His first teaching job was at Eton, where he became head of classics, leaving in 2016 to become director of studies and then deputy headmaster at Harrow. He became Warden of St Edward's, Oxford in September 2021. St Edward's, Oxford is an independent, co-educational boarding and day school for children aged 13 to 18, and they've got over 700 pupils. They're a member of the HMC and were founded in 1863. And the school is affectionately known as Teddies. So you might hear Alastair and I talking about Teddies during our conversation. That's its affectionate name within the Oxford community. I just want to pause for a moment to say thank you to you. The Independent School Podcast has now passed its second birthday, published more than 100 episodes and has had over 6,000 listens. As the founder and host of this podcast, I've been really humbled by the number of people who have told me that it's really helped them. From school heads who've rushed up to me at conferences and told me how it's been a real guide for them through tricky times, through to experienced directors of development who have said it reassures them that they're on the right track. So thank you for listening and for all your kind comments along the way. If this podcast is helping you, then I invite you to join the 300 people who have asked to get my weekly emails. That way you'll hear about each episode as it's published, as well as the special offers that I only tell people about when they're on my mailing list. So to get my weekly emails, you can go to www.consultjuliette.co.uk/sign up. So Alastair, welcome to the Independent School Podcast. It's fantastic to have you with us here today.
Thank you very much for the invitation to talk with you, Juliet.
You're very welcome. So the first thing I love to dive into with people on the podcast is the root of your passion for education. Now, I know that you didn't go straight into teaching. You kind of had a first career in the fund management, the finance sector. What was it that made you think teaching is what's really kind of the thing you want to be dedicating your career to? What was that root of the passion for education?
So I nearly became a teacher when I first left university. Because it had been in the back of my mind since I was a pupil at school. I had the most amazing teachers when I was a boy, and they really inspired me with my love of classics and my love of French, the subjects that I took on to study at university. And I thought really carefully about going straight into teaching when I graduated. But I decided that I would become a fund manager instead. I did a year in Paris working for Schroders, then the merchant bank, and at the end of that they offered me a chance to work in London in either fund management or corporate finance, and I took the fund management route thinking that I would see a different industry, a different way of life, live in London, and I really enjoyed that for 5 really great years. But teaching was always in the back of my mind during that time. And I decided after 5 years that I didn't love fund management well enough to do it until I retired. And that I would actually like to revisit that idea of becoming a teacher. And the more I looked at it and the more I spoke with teachers and visited schools, the more I became convinced by the rightness of that plan for me. And so I then resigned my job and took my first teaching job at Eton. And it was everything that I hoped it would be.
Fantastic. Isn't it funny that quite a few of us, I think, in the teaching or in the education profession, at some point maybe had this root of an idea that this was the area they wanted to be focusing in on, but then decide to try out something else. And then when you come back to it, you're more committed somehow, aren't you? That you've made a purposeful choice. This is definitely the right place for you. Did you bring with you from that fund management role a slightly different perspective compared to maybe some others, some other colleagues who maybe had gone straight into teaching without having that first career?
I think that is probably true. It's not a precondition that you need to have done other things to be a really inspiring and great teacher. But I saw a lot of the world. So I covered the European financial markets. So I traveled quite a lot in continental Europe. I worked with really, really great people who had a huge experience of life. I spent a lot of time analyzing companies and meeting their managements and touring their factories and their offices all over Europe. So I brought a breadth of experience into teaching that I wouldn't have had if I'd just gone straight into the profession. So I think the answer is probably yes. And obviously, I'd weighed up lots of different careers. I'd covered lots of different sectors. So I had some knowledge of different types of employment. And those things were frequently talking points with the pupils with whom I was working. And that's been the case, even till the present day, even though my knowledge now of that industry is 20 years out of date.
Well, even so, it gives a new talking point for alumni as well, potentially understanding the different worlds in which our alumni sit, depending on their professional careers that they've taken since school. So one of the things that you mentioned there is that sense of having a broader perspective and then coming back into education. I think one of the things I'd love to explore is this trend that we're seeing across the sector towards the importance of partnerships, the importance of service, the importance of not just outreach, but an authentic partnership with community groups and with state schools that are in the communities that are around our independent schools. And I think there's a common theme there between the idea that schools just don't operate in a vacuum. They're part of a community. And I think we're seeing schools look outside their gates a bit more in the last couple of decades. Wonder what your thoughts are around that trend and what you're doing in particular at St Edward's, Oxford.
Well, I think it's absolutely right in terms of the trend, and that should absolutely be the case. So I think the public benefit is a topical term at the moment, and for political reasons. But education is a public benefit. And I think the greatest public benefit of any school is in the pupils whom it sends out into the world. And if you want to fulfill that function properly, you need to give pupils an experience which goes far beyond the timetable, far beyond co-curricular activity, and which really grounds them in the real world that they're going to join beyond the school gate. So that, I think, is part of it. And I think there's an increasing awareness of inequality, and an awareness of that is a precursor to doing something about it. And I think the attitudes of mind with which pupils leave, if they've been involved to a significant extent in partnership work during their time at school, is the most natural and best way to start to address those issues in our society. So we've done a lot of work on that here at St Edward's in the last few years. We have a department called Beyond Teddies, which is the umbrella term that we give to all of our work in partnership with local schools, local charities, other organizations. And one of the initiatives that we've introduced this year is called Teddies Collaborates. And we think this is unique in independent schools because it's putting partnership work, putting service to the community right in the center of what we do. So within our timetable, for 90 minutes every week, all 180 pupils in our lower sixth are going out of the school gates to work in local primary schools, in food banks, in charity shops, working in the community in partnership with other organizations, just as they're taking maths lessons. It's no different from that. And we believe that it's every bit as important as any other aspect, if not more important, than the other aspects of their education here with us, which is why we've built it in, if you like, to their lived experience of school. And the feedback on it has been fantastic. So from the partnership organizations, they've gained help and they've gained support from us on the doorstep. But for our pupils, the benefits have been enormous. It's really opened their eyes to a world the world into which they will go and to the privilege that they have. And that can only be a very good thing for their attitudes of mind in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what you've just articulated there beautifully is this sense that as a sector now we're seeing that authentic partnership benefits both sides. It has to be mutually beneficial because that's partnership. And so that understanding that it's genuinely helping local communities or local state school providers and so on, but that it's also genuinely helping the pupils. And I think as a sector, we're starting to articulate that in a slightly more eloquent, nuanced way, aren't we, as to why that's important. I think
that's absolutely right. And I think it can't be a passive thing. It can't be the opening up a facility and a message that goes out that says, you're very welcome to come and use our gym facilities or our arts facilities. It has to be much more active than that. Active on the part of our pupils in the way that I've just described with Teddies Collaborates, but also active on the part of our staff. So a huge number of our teachers are involved in supervising those activities. A huge number of our teachers are involved in teaching in local primary schools, and actually into our contracts of employment since the start of last year, we've built in an expectation that the teachers working at St Edward's can be asked to work in local state schools, to go out and share the benefit of their subject knowledge, their enthusiasm, their inspiration, working alongside teachers in those schools and with the children who go there. And that's a huge benefit, I think, to the local community, and something that we want to do more of in the years ahead.
I think it's really interesting as well. So when we think about culture, we think about the hard and the soft elements of culture. And I'm often talking to schools about culture change and how difficult it is to kind of instigate and then sustain culture change. But what you've just talked about there is some of the kind of what we call hard elements of culture, things that you've changed, like the employment contracts, building into your curriculum. These are things that as a head, you can just say, this is what I want to do and get it done with the approval of governors and so on. But there's also the soft elements of culture, isn't there? There's the sense of how you build in this sense that there is an equality between the maths lesson and the going out to do service. And it isn't about one being more important than the other. It isn't about looking down on our communities. It's about partnership. I wonder what you felt about that more soft side of the culture and how you've found that journey of moving the school in that direction of recognising the importance of your Beyond Teddies work.
So I think that's a great question. I think I'm very lucky to work here because I think this school has always had a very open, outward-looking culture. And working in partnership with the community in Oxford is nothing new. And that's helped partly by our location. We're right in the middle of the city. But it's helped more than anything by the attitudes that are there among teachers, among other staff, and among pupils, and indeed among parents who send their children here. So there's been an openness to those things that has made it very easy. So I've been pushing on basically an open door. I think that on the other hand, it's not the harder elements there, the contractual element and the programmatic element in a service program, in a partnership program. You can take the edges off that hardness, but in the way in which you talk about it, the way in which you promote it, the way in which you put it center stage. So in our assemblies, in our common room meetings for teaching staff, in our briefings for all staff, in our briefings for parents, partnership work is front and center of the things that I talk about, because it is at the heart of what we stand for as a school. And I think by doing that, as a head teacher, as a leader in a school community, you can really shape people's approach to a far greater extent than you can by writing things down or putting things into a timetable. It's the way in which you talk about it, ask about it, promote it in all conversations and in all forums. That for me is what makes the difference in cultural terms.
Yes, absolutely. It's the language really matters. And actually, I've just looked down at my notes and reminded myself classics and French were your subjects. So this is coming back to your passion for language in a way, that this is the way you're communicating with enthusiasm and excitement it takes the edges off those hard kind of policy decisions.
I think that's right. But talk's cheap, as they say, and it's actions that count much more than words. So all of the management team here, for example, we've been out into the partnerships that have been running in Teddies Collaborates to sit with the children going out to those local primary schools and other organizations, partly to show our support for them, partly to talk directly with them about their experience and what they're taking away from it, partly to develop our own relationships with the teachers working in those schools and the people running those charitable organizations. And I think that kind of action on the part of a management team really says a lot. It says far more eloquently says it far more eloquently than anybody could do in a briefing or a set of remarks.
Yes, 100% with you, 100% on that. And it's interesting actually, because the next area I wanted to touch on has a lot of similarities here. So one of the things that we think about when we're leading schools, not just the head, but the whole leadership team, as you've just mentioned there, when you're leading the culture of a school, you're basically curating the intellectual life of a community, aren't you? And taking away all the sense of, this being it needs to be a business. We need to make sure that we're kind of breaking even. We've got money to invest in the future of the school, etc. But at the heart of it, what you're doing is leading that intellectual life of a school. And I wonder what your thoughts are on how you've gone about that in the time that you've been at St Edward's to create that culture of scholarship and excitement around learning for the staff and for the pupils.
We're a charity, not a business, and education is at the heart of what we do. And in order to educate children, we need to keep learning ourselves. And one of the great challenges in a busy school environment is for teachers to keep up with their own subjects, to keep up to date with the latest thinking, the latest research, and to keep up with their reading. And too often, I think those things are crowded out by the busyness of school life, co-curricular life, the busyness of the timetable, pastoral care. Those things are really important and they take a lot of time. So as a school, and as a leadership group in a school, we need to practice what we preach, and we need to do those things ourselves. But secondly, we need to actively create time and create structure that allows those things to happen, so that teachers are constantly investing in their own subject knowledge, constantly investing in their own pedagogy and their own understanding of how they're communicating with the children with whom they're working. So lots of things come into play there. So there are some kind of programmatic things. So last year we introduced a new policy on sabbaticals and leaves of absence, so that every 5 or so years any teacher can apply to be away for a sabbatical term, and with even greater frequency, teachers can apply to be away during the second half of the summer term to do something related to their subject, something related to their work with the children in the school. And that's a hugely positive way in which to refresh teachers professionally and personally, and the benefits that come back for the school are huge, and we're looking forward to seeing those benefits realized over the next few years. And then beyond that, there's the super curricular life of the school, the academic extension, if you like, that exists beyond the timetable. And that's obviously primarily for pupils, so visiting speakers and academics who come to be resident in the school for a time, and a really rich program of lectures and debates and academic events in the evening. And what happens there, of course, is that teachers attend too. And that's good for their subject knowledge. It's good to keep them in touch with the latest thinking and with the people working in the universities and beyond in their areas. But at the same time, it also generates conversation between pupils and teachers. So that process of education continues not just in classrooms, but actually in the school more broadly. So the corridors of the boarding houses and the touch lines of the playing fields, there are conversations going on there which are about academic matters, not narrow curricular matters, but about ideas. And it's those kinds of conversations that I think really inspire pupils. And I think back to my time at school and all of my experience as a teacher, that's been some of the most fulfilling and enriching aspects of my time in schools.
Absolutely. And we know that beyond the core curriculum, there's that whole skill set that we need young people to be really comfortable with, including critical thinking, creative thinking, all of these areas that we address in the classroom, but which really come to life when you're giving pupils an opportunity to ask really good questions of someone who's senior in a career that they're interested in entering. For example, that idea of getting the pupils to experience that curiosity-led creative thinking process that goes alongside all of what you've just said is about a lifelong curiosity for the world, isn't it? For life.
I think that's absolutely right. So, when we want the pupils who are in our schools, and this is not just true for me, it's true for everybody working in education, to be the kinds of people who in the future will be talking about ideas, who will be visiting galleries and reading books and going to museums and thinking about the life of the mind. And those kinds of habits need to be learned. I'd add just one other thing. It's not just that children need to learn intellectual skills when they're at school. They also need to be aware that they've learnt them. because only through being aware that they have them will they be able to apply them in less familiar contexts. I'll give you a really good example of that. So we spend a lot of time when we're teaching history talking about the evaluation of sources and the importance of understanding the risk of bias in the presentation of historical events. And children are good at those things, and they're part of the exam skill set that they take into history papers when they're 16 and when they're taking their A-levels and the IB when they're leaving school. But often those same skills are not applied well enough when people are listening to the news, reading the paper, evaluating a comment made by maybe somebody in public life. And that's one of the most important skills that we can teach children, the transferability of the things that they've acquired, the skills they've acquired in school to all aspects of their lives. And that's part of our social responsibility, I think, as educators.
Absolutely. And even to take it one step further, not to get makes too ridiculous, but the transferability of skills is a skill itself to learn, in the sense that I think through my career, it's only really been in the last 5-8 years that I've really started to make connections intentionally between all of the different things that I'm seeing in the environment in which I live and work. And that it's through that process of being a bit of a magpie, curating ideas, trends, thoughts like kind of that are coming across, that I'm coming across in all elements of my life, and then with intentionality applying them to my work. That transferability is a skill in its own right, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely
that's where we
true.
find innovation as well, isn't it?
I think that's absolutely right. So we're in the process of building here a curricular map to show the full range of digital, intellectual, emotional skills that pupils are learning while they're here, and where it is in our curriculum, very broadly defined, that they're acquiring them. And that, we think, is going to be one of the best ways to signpost pupils and to start conversation about that transferability of skills. And the point you make there about how people's thinking changes as they gain an experience of life is absolutely right. You know, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from poor judgment. And we want to help our pupils to gain the experiences that they need to make the right judgments, the best judgments that they can when they're finished at school. And the acceleration of that process is really important. And the world's becoming a harder place to navigate. So we need to make sure that they've got those lessons firmly in mind when they've finished here. We want pupils to leave our school ready for whatever it is they want to do next, ready for whatever it is that the world is going to throw at them.
Yeah, precisely. And interestingly, you are obviously embedded in a city within Oxford where you have one of the world's leading universities on your doorstep. I wonder whether you intentionally made sure that actually the research and the work, the intellectual life at the University of Oxford is something that you're then transferring into your school's culture of learning as well, with a view to helping pupils to understand that transferability and what comes next, for many of whom it may well be University of Oxford or others.
We're really lucky to be where we are. So we're in Summertown, just at the edge of Oxford. We're about 15 minutes from the centre of the university, 5 minutes on a bus. There are soft benefits there. So this is a city of learning. It's full of faculty buildings and museums and galleries and colleges and libraries. You can't escape learning in the city, and that has an effect on all of us, not just pupils but staff too, living and working here. But beyond that, obviously, it provides a huge opportunity for doing things programmatically within the school. So I'll give you just a few examples. So we regularly take pupils into the city, to parts of the university and to parts of the city for their learning, and we're looking to do that programmatically in a series of Oxford days. So half days off the timetable when pupils will go subject by subject and year group by year group into town. And they'll come away from the school site to do something totally different and hopefully inspiring in the city or the university just down the road. And then in addition to that, we're running now a series of what we call Oxford lectures, where we're inviting academics from the university here or from other universities to come into the school to be resident for a couple of days, to give a series of seminars and workshops, not just to our pupils, but to pupils from local secondary schools and their teachers as well, to give an open lecture to our pupils from those other schools near here, and to teachers and indeed to parents and staff on a theme of general interest related to their subject, and then to stay for dinner and to have supper with the teachers in their subject working here at Teddies and with teachers from local schools, building those connections. Come back to that point I made earlier about partnership, but also to come back to the other point I made earlier about the inspiration of scholarship, helping our teachers and other teachers to think again about their subjects and to keep up with the latest developments. So that program of Oxford lectures has been one of the recent innovations, and it runs on a 3-year cycle, 5 lectures per year covering all subject areas. the idea being that every pupil in whatever their subject area of interest will have that moment of inspiration during their time in the school. Yeah. And then the other thing about Oxford, it ties into that point about partnerships. So Teddies Collaborates wouldn't be possible if the travel time were too great, and it's only doable for us because those local primaries and those other organizations with which we're working in partnership are literally on the doorstep.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously it sort of goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, that when you have these elements of a strategy that all reinforce each other, so you've got the partnerships feeding into the intellectual life of the school and vice versa, you've got the connection to the city of Oxford and the University of Oxford feeding into those things as well. I'm sure there are many other areas that you could connect in. You've got a web of interconnected decisions and choices that you've been making, which positively reinforce each other. And when we think about strategy and school strategy in particular, that's what we're looking for, is those coherent choices that are being made, which all leverage each other into a system that drives you towards that positive vision that you're working towards. So I love that fact that you're connecting all these different things together.
Yeah, well, I think that's really important, and people need, whether they're studying in a school or working in a school, as teachers or as other members of staff, to have a sense of direction, to have a sense of what the school of which they're a part is about. Yeah. And scholarship, excellence, and service are the three themes, if you like, and everything that we're doing fits under one of them, and they all cohere, as you rightly say. Yeah. And it's all related to our situation here in Oxford, which is what really sets us apart from other schools. So I'm pleased to hear you say these things. I think it's absolutely right, and I think that's a big part of my job as warden.
Yes, is to pick up on what those connections are and make the tough choices sometimes. I don't know whether you're willing to share with us, but have there been times when you've said no to a good idea, but because it doesn't quite fit as a coherent set of decisions that you've made alongside other choices that you've been making and talking about today?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, every choice made is an option foregone. Yes. So if you're reinvesting 90 minutes of time in the Teddies Collaborates program, that's 90 minutes that pupils are not spending on something else. And if you're taking pupils off-site for a half day or a day into the city, then they're not going to be involved in lots of other activities at school. And then there are funding and resourcing questions that come up all the time. So the lots of decisions are made all the time, and we try to balance it out. But as much as possible, we want to develop options without foregoing other choices, and that's the trick of successful management.
Yes, exactly. Not to close down your options when you don't need to, but sometimes absolutely closing down those alternatives so you can take a bold position on the thing that you're really gonna push forwards with. It can really pay dividends. So to have the confidence as a team, a leadership team, and the governors behind you to make those bold decisions when required is really important.
Well, we're helped by having a very long horizon. So we're in our 160th year, and we hope to have just as many years and hopefully more ahead of us. And that means that we don't need to do everything all at once. Yeah. And if there is a good idea that is difficult to realize in the short term, it can be set aside for the future, and you can then come back to it. And we're working under a set of annual objectives, like every good management team, but we're also working within the framework of a 5-year plan. And over the next few years, we'll develop another 5-year plan to take us out to a 10-year horizon from the start of my time as warden. Mm-hmm. And that means that if there are good ideas, if we can't do them straight away for reasons of resource or for reasons of practicality or for reasons of potential impact on other things that we're doing as a school, then we can come back to them. And a good idea is still a good idea. On the other hand, if it's a really good idea, we need to be getting on with it, because if it makes a meaningful difference to the generation of pupils who are here in school with us now, then we should do it. Yes. No pupil gets their shell year back. They don't do year 9 again. They do it once. And if we can make it better this year, then we should. Exactly.
And it is one of the reasons I love working with independent schools is because they have that almost like a generational time horizon, a vision of what are we handing over to the next generation. And there's that little sense of urgency of the young people that were in our care today don't get their childhood back again. This is their one chance at their schooling experience. And so there is that combination of urgency and long-term thinking that I really enjoy. One of the things that we've touched on multiple times in our conversation is this idea that we sit as schools within a complex web of external environment. We've talked about community partnerships. We've talked about engaging with the community, with the intellectual life of the universities nearby and so on. The other thing, of course, that we're all acutely aware of is that the environment in which we sit externally is changing constantly. And we've seen some pretty sudden shifts in that environment. Obviously, we've had the pandemic, we've had inflationary kind of shocks to the system around the war in Ukraine and energy prices. And then more recently, at least within the UK, we've had some political risk around potential taxation changes for the sector. And then globally, AI and the kind of the rise of people's awareness of the impact, positive and negative, that AI has on our world. I wonder how you as a leadership team condense all of this thinking and all of your thoughts into a coherent action plan as to how you're going to keep an eye on what's happening externally, react where appropriate, but not get distracted constantly by this rapid pace of change that we're seeing. How are you dealing with that as a leadership team?
The first thing to say is it's not new. So I think every generation of school leaders has contended with, changes in society and changes worldwide, events, initiatives, changes of public opinion, changes of politics. All those things have always been on the horizon for schools. So the most important thing, and this is a statement of general truth, is to keep talking about them, keep thinking about them, make sure the busyness of school life doesn't crowd them out, and there's enough time and space to step back and think about the longer term, and above all, to keep communicating externally about them. So one of the biggest challenges is a kind of bunker mentality where people aren't informed. So parents don't know what we're thinking potentially. Members of staff don't know what we're thinking and how we're planning ahead. People with whom we're working outside the school, they need to be equally well informed. So we need to make sure that we are communicating with everybody all of the time. So just a few weeks ago, we did a briefing for all our parents on some of the political threats to our school and to the sector, and how that might play out, and what we're doing to think ahead to a potentially changed context in a few years' time. And the more we can do that, the more we can be open about it, the better we'll be able to navigate those challenges that lie ahead. I think in every challenge there's opportunity. So there's a debate, clearly, and there's going to be much more of a debate over the next few years about independent education, about the taxation of independent schools, about the resourcing of education in the UK, not just in schools, but also in the universities. And I think that's a big conversation of which a school like ours and a sector like ours should absolutely be part. And we should be active in that dialogue. And then there are the technological changes. So ChatGPT has been much in the papers as a risk to schools, but actually it's also an opportunity. So can you use ChatGPT to construct more model answers that teachers can then refine into a perfect answer, so saving time, but also improving the educational experience of pupils with whom they're working. And we've got a working party running on that at the moment, which is going to report at the end of the summer term in June, which will set out the ways in which we think we can turn this to everybody's advantage, because it's not going away. And those technological changes, you can't wish them undone. They're here. They're part of our children's landscape, and they're only going to be a bigger part of it in the future. So we need, as educators, to be active and positive about those changes, rather than concerned and reactive to them in a way that's potentially negative for pupils and for us as an institution in the long term.
Yes, I agree with everything you've just said. I love the fact that it's you've rooted that in the communication to the stakeholders and to the external groups who have an influence over the sector. The fact that actually we're all in this together, and so there's the sense that there's no one person that's going to be kind of sage-like looking externally and saying what we should do. This is a collaborative process of evolution towards a new future, which is constantly changing. This is, as you said, a constant kind of change that we experience in schools. And I love the fact at the end there, you're absolutely right about ChatGPT. I was quite concerned early in 2023 to see a bit of a knee-jerk negative reaction within education. I think maybe that was just a surprise. People didn't quite see this coming. And interestingly, even within the techie world, they didn't entirely see it coming either. They didn't realize how far the technology was until about sort of September, October last year to 2022. What I've been more pleased to see is, as you've just articulated there, the fact that ChatGPT in particular brings positives and negatives, opportunities and threats. And yes, it might threaten the continual during the school year kind of assessment of individual pupil progress. But at the same time, we have to educate our young people to be AI native, just as we know young people today are digital native in a way that perhaps you and I weren't. We've learned it. The young people coming up through our schools now are going to be AI native. And so they need to know how they're going to be utilizing it to basically extend their cognitive power, their kind of curiosity for the world, and accelerate their learning as an opportunity, as opposed to just a threat on the way that we currently examine pupil progress.
I think that's right. And we're an IB school, so we offer A levels and the International Baccalaureate to our pupils in the sixth form, and they choose those routes roughly 50-50. And the IB has taken a similarly enlightened attitude to the one you've just described.
Exactly.
So they're not railing against ChatGPT. They're saying it needs to be used well, it needs to be used properly, it needs to be referenced if it is a resource on which pupils are drawing, but it shouldn't not be part of their landscape.
Yes.
And I think that's the right attitude to take to it, and I think that's the attitude certainly that we're looking to have.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the other point about communication, just to pick up on what you said there about looking outwards and maintaining dialogue, it needs to be a conversation. So it's not just that we need as a school or as a sector to keep people informed about our thinking and how it's changing. It's also that we need to listen. And we need to have the input of our parents, the input of the people who work in the school, the input of the people with whom we're working in partnership. We need to canvass their opinions on some of these big issues in our society, big issues in our political landscape, so that we can work together. And that's for me the best type of partnership, very broadly defined.
Absolutely. And interestingly, we've kind of full circle back to the initial kind of conversation around partnership. And I think you're right that we're now seeing an authentic sense of partnership with community, but we're also seeing, as you say, an authentic sense of partnership with our parents, with our pupils. You know, the idea that pupil voice isn't just sort of the pupils dictating, I don't know, charity of the year or whatever it might be. It's genuinely listening to pupil experience and to lived experience within the communities that we lead, to understand how we can make little tiny changes that make a big difference to the way that people either perceive us or the way that people experience kind of the school on a day-to-day basis. And I think it is shifting, isn't it? It does feel different to me to about 10 years ago. When
I think that is definitely true. So if I think back to my time at school, you know, we did what we were told, and there wasn't much dialogue.
Yeah.
And that was not uncommon. And now, you know, this year we appointed created a new post, head of pupil voice and action, and Fiona Wickens is the holder of that post for the first time, and she convenes a whole series of year group forums and committees covering literally every aspect of pupils' experience of the school, and the feedback from those conversations is then discussed at meetings of the housemasters and housemistresses. It's discussed at meetings of the management team. It's then fed back to the whole school by me in our weekly assemblies, and it informs the development of our objectives for next year and eventually the development of the 5-year framework within which we're working, because it's very much the children's school, and that is absolutely as it should be. And in addition to that, you can canvass pupils' views in surveys, and most schools do this, and we're no different. We do an annual pupil survey every summer covering every aspect of their experience in the school, which we then take together with the qualitative elements that come from directly heard pupil voice in those various forums and committees, likewise to inform our strategy. And that goes alongside, coming back to that point you made earlier on about looking to the world that lies ahead, the world beyond the school gate. We're doing a lot of work with the former pupils of the school, OSE we call them, Old St Edwardians, and we're surveying them just after they finished at university, when they're in their late 20s, when they're in their late 30s, just to get a sense of the ways in which they think the school could have prepared them differently and better for the things that they're doing, for their studies at university, for their first jobs, for their second jobs, for changing jobs, for their stage of life. And we're taking their feedback to shape our curriculum. So the subjects that we offer, the way in which we teach them, the program that we run, the kinds of life skills that we teach formally and informally. In what ways could we be developing our curriculum and thinking about the ways in which we structure pupils' time here, so that they are properly ready when they leave, the pupils who are at Teddies now, for the world into which they will go. And we're going to continue to run those surveys of our former pupils every year at those kind of marker points, and gradually build up a picture of the ways in which our school needs to change, like every institution needs to evolve.
Exactly. And that form of active listening obviously benefits the school and future pupils, because you're able to continually reflect and shift and change what you're doing. But it also benefits that whole pupil voice and action. It benefits the pupils themselves, because as we reflected on earlier in our conversation, this is about preparing them to go out into the world. And so if they have had experience within their school, safe school environment, trying to enact change, trying to take action on certain things, they're learning that process of how to do that constructively, how to build kind of alliances, how to give feedback in a way which is actually acted on and listened to. And all of this actually reflects back to the pupil experience in terms of preparing them for next stages as well, where they do have agency. It's just they need to be kind of working together with others, or working really cleverly to make sure their time is allocated to the things where they really can make a difference. We all have agency. We just can't have agency about everything that we care about simultaneously.
I think that's absolutely right, and it plays out on a much larger scale in our political life as a nation.
Yes.
As a society. So one of the challenges for our society is the level of political engagement being relatively low.
Yes.
So the turnout rate for elections is not as high as it should be, and the level of active engagement in political discourse is not as high as it should be in our country. And if pupils learn how to have a voice, see the benefits of expressing their views, see changes as a consequence of dialogue with other people in their school context, then those kinds of lessons are readily transferable beyond school, and hopefully will lead over time to a much more active political life for pupils leaving school now, such that the discourse in our country is richer and more inclusive in the way that it really needs to be, and hopefully in the future maybe less polarized.
And I love to end on an optimistic note, and hopefully that will enable that future generation to address the really big challenges that we're leaving for them in terms of climate, in terms of inequality. And I think you're absolutely right that it's one of the concrete ways in which we're preparing young people to make a difference in the world is through them being able to engage within that political process as well.
And that for me is the public benefit of education.
Yes, exactly. Engaged young people who grow up to be adults who are actually making a positive difference. And whatever area they feel passionately about, they define their success, but they are able to make a difference because they have the skills to do that. Thank you so much for your time today, Alastair. I love that we've had a theme through our conversation, kind of looking beyond the school gates, thinking about service and partnerships, the intellectual life of the school, the conversation that we had there about the coherence of the strategic choices that we make, and the fact that sometimes we have to make tough choices in order to create a strategy that really drives us towards delivering that 5-10 year generational vision that we have as schools. And I think as well, you mentioned a few times having the time to think, both for teachers to have the time to think and to read and to research and to explore around their subject area, and for leaders to have the time to understand and think about the impact of the external environment changes on the school. I think that's really important as well. Thank you so much for your time with us today, Alastair.
Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Independent School Podcast, the podcast that helps senior leaders in private schools to think and act more strategically, both because they want to secure the future of their school and because they want to help build a more equal and just world. You can listen in everywhere that podcasts are available. And if you want to catch up on previous episodes or follow any of the links that I've mentioned today, just head over to www.consultjuliet.co.uk/podcast.